Korea Real Estate Explained, Episode 10, Korea's Demographic Time Bomb. What the world's lowest birth rate means for property over the long term. 0.72. In 2023, Korea's total fertility rate fell to 0.72, the lowest ever recorded for any country in human history. For context, the replacement rate is 2.1. Japan, at its demographic worst, hit 1.26. No country has ever recovered from a fertility rate below 1.0. This is not a future risk to be modeled and discounted. The consequences are already in motion. The cohorts that were never born are already missing from school rolls, military recruitment figures, and the first-time buyer pool. What we are discussing in this episode is not a theoretical scenario. It is the arithmetic of a population that has already decided its own future size. What do the numbers actually mean for housing demand? 4 figures. 0.72, the current total fertility rate, the lowest ever recorded globally. Replacement is 2.1, minus 27%. Korea's population projection from 2024 to 2070, from 51 million to approximately 37 million people. That is 14 million fewer people in 46 years. 50%, the share of the population that will be over 65 by 2070, up from 19% today. 1 in 2 Koreans will be elderly within a single generation, and 2040, the year Korea's total household count is projected to peak. Not the population peak, that has already passed. The household count peak. After 2040, even the solo household buffer runs out. Both population and household numbers decline simultaneously. That is when structural housing demand begins its long contraction. This chart shows you the shape of the problem directly. 3 population pyramids, 2000, 2024, and 2060. In 2000, Korea had a proper pyramid. A wide base of young people, tapering upward through working-age cohorts with a narrow peak of elderly. The classic structure of a growing economy. By 2024, the shape has already inverted at the base. The largest cohorts are now in their 40s and 50s, the demographic echo of Korea's 1970s and 1980s boom years. The bottom of the chart, the young cohorts, has narrowed sharply. By 2060, the transformation is complete. The pyramid has become a column, heavy at the top, thin at the base. The working-age population that funds pensions, pays mortgages, and drives housing demand has shrunk dramatically. The elderly cohort has expanded to dominate the structure. What you are looking at is not a forecast. The people in those 2060 bars are already born. This is arithmetic, not prediction. Here is the important nuance that prevents this from being a simple bearish story. At least for now. Korea's total population is shrinking, but its household count is still growing. Single-person households, il-in-gagu, now represent more than 35% of all Korean households, and the share is still rising. Divorces, delayed marriage, and an aging population living alone all generate demand for housing units even as total headcount falls. More units needed per person temporarily offsets the population decline. But the word is temporarily. Household formation is projected to peak around 2040. After that point, the last large birth cohorts have aged past household formation, and the smaller cohorts that follow cannot compensate. From 2040 onward, both population and household numbers fall together. National housing demand enters a structural decline. The key distinction for property investors: the window between now and 2040 is meaningfully different from the period after 2040. Cycle dynamics still dominate in the near term. Structural headwinds dominate beyond it. Not all property is affected equally. There are clear structural winners and structural losers in this demographic scenario. The winner, small units in Seoul. Solo households, young professionals, and elderly living alone all want compact, well-located units near transit. 25 to 33 Pyeong in prime Seoul, Gangnam, Mapo, Yongsan, the major transit hubs, has secular demographic support that overrides the national headcount decline. Concentration is the force. Korea is not uniformly depopulating. It is concentrating. Seoul gains population as regional areas lose it. The first loser, large family units in outer areas. 4-bedroom apartments in outer Gyeonggi and provincial cities were designed for the family formation cohort. That cohort is shrinking. These units face structural demand headwinds that will intensify over time. The second loser, regional cities already in decline. Cities that have lost 10 to 15% of their population face a structural pressure that no rate cycle can reverse. New supply plus shrinking demand plus aging owners is a combination the market cannot sustainably price. What has Korea's government done about this? The short answer, a great deal of spending with very limited effect. Cash incentives. Over 20 years, Korea has deployed hundreds of trillions of won in baby bonuses, childcare subsidies, and parental leave support. The fertility rate has continued falling throughout. OECD research consistently finds that cash incentives alone have marginal effect on total fertility rates unless accompanied by structural changes in housing cost and work culture. Immigration. Korea's immigration rate remains among the lowest in the OECD. Public opinion has historically resisted large-scale immigration. Some expansion of H-2 visas for manufacturing and agriculture has occurred, but not at a scale that moves the demographic needle. Housing cost. This is the variable most researchers now identify as the primary driver. When property in Seoul costs 15 to 20 times annual income, young couples defer marriage, defer children, or leave the city. Seoul property prices are both a symptom of Korea's economic success and a structural cause of its demographic failure. The two problems are, at their root, the same problem. Japan provides the closest historical parallel and the clearest warning. Japan's total fertility rate fell below 2.0 in 1975. Property prices peaked in 1991. The 30-year correction that followed was not caused by demographics alone, but demographics made recovery structurally impossible in most regional areas. The important distinctions. Japan's decline was slower and from a higher base. Korea's is faster, from a lower starting point, and with more extreme geographic concentration. Seoul's dominance over the Korean economy and population is more extreme than Tokyo's over Japan. The Seoul regional divergence in Korea's demographic scenario may therefore be even sharper than Japan's. The lesson for investors is direct. In Japan, the safe harbor was central Tokyo, which held and eventually recovered while regional Japan deflated. The Korea analog is clear. Seoul Prime, particularly compact, well-located units, is structurally more defensible than any other Korean property segment. Regional Korea, particularly mid-tier provincial cities, faces the version of this story with no safe harbor. The timeline gives you the key decision points. Now to 2030. Household count is still growing, driven by solo households. Property demand holds in major cities. Regional divergence intensifies but is not yet extreme. Cycle dynamics dominate over structural forces in this window. 2030 to 2040. Birth cohort decline becomes visible in school closures, military recruitment shortfalls, and declining first-time buyer numbers. Household formation slows materially. Regional markets begin sustained structural decline in some areas. 2040 to 2050, household count peaks and turns negative. Aggregate national housing demand begins declining. Regional markets face Japan-style structural pressure. Seoul maintains demand via continued urbanization concentration, 2050 and beyond. Population significantly smaller. Seoul holds, but at prices reflecting a smaller total buyer pool. Regional Korea enters a trajectory that no policy tool has historically reversed. 3 things to take away from this episode. 1. Demographics are destiny, but slowly. The property consequences of Korea's demographic collapse are 20 to 30 years away at the national level. Short-term rate cycles, policy shifts, and supply constraints still dominate near-term price movements. But for long-hold positions, demographic forces are the most important structural variable. 2. Seoul compacts win, regional fades. The demographic scenario is structurally bullish for small, well-located units in Seoul, and progressively bearish for large units in declining cities. Position sizing should reflect this distinction, not just current price levels or recent momentum. 3. Housing affordability and fertility are the same problem. Korea cannot solve its demographic crisis without solving its housing affordability crisis. Any government that is serious about fertility must be serious about Seoul property prices. The two conversations cannot remain separate. Korea Real Estate Explained. Episode 10. Complete. That's the full series. Episodes 1 through 10 from Jonsei to interest rate cycles to the demographic time bomb. Thank you for watching. Subscribe at KRE Official for future episodes and market updates.